3 months ago, if someone told me I'd be dealing with false harassment accusations at work, I would have laughed. But here we are, and honestly, the whole thing was so calculated, so manipulative, that I still get angry thinking about it. I'm a senior research scientist at Neurovast Labs in Baltimore. We develop AI applications for neurological research, basically trying to help computers understand how brains work. It's cutting-edge stuff, and I've been there for 6 years, working my way up from junior researcher to where I am now. I love what I do, and I'm good at it. Really good. That's probably why Selena Marquez saw me as a threat. Selena joined our team about 18 months ago. Talented, no doubt about it, with a PhD in computational neuroscience from Stanford. But from day one, there was something about the way she operated that rubbed me wrong. Not her work, that was solid, but how she positioned herself in every situation. You know that person who always manages to be in the right place when the boss walks by? Who somehow gets their name attached to projects they barely contributed to? That was Selena. She had this way of making herself indispensable while making others look dispensable. I didn't pay it much attention initially. Office politics aren't really my thing. I prefer to let my work speak for itself. But I started noticing patterns. During team meetings, she'd subtly redirect conversations to highlight her contributions while diminishing others. She'd volunteer for high-visibility tasks and then delegate the actual work to junior researchers while keeping the credit. The breaking point was supposed to be the Prometheus project. Neurovast had landed a massive contract with Johns Hopkins to develop a neural mapping AI that could predict seizure patterns in epileptic patients. It was the kind of project that could define your career. I'd been working on the preliminary research for 8 months, developing the core algorithms and neural network architecture. Professor Adrian Locke, our division head, called me into his office in early September. "Darius, I'm putting you forward for Principal Investigator on Prometheus," he said, barely looking up from his tablet. "The promotion comes with it, obviously. 40% salary bump, your own lab space, 2 junior researchers to supervise." I'd been working toward this moment for years. Principal Investigator meant recognition, respect, and financial security. More importantly, it meant I could pursue the research directions I believed in without constantly justifying every decision to committee. But I should have known Selena wouldn't let that happen without a fight. It started small. Little comments during meetings that seemed supportive but weren't quite right. "Oh, Darius has such interesting theoretical approaches," she'd say with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Though sometimes I wonder if they're practical for clinical applications." Or, "Darius is so focused on the technical details. It's great to have someone thinking about the big picture too." This, while she presented ideas that were clearly derived from my research notes. I should have shut it down then, but honestly, I thought it was petty office stuff that would blow over. I had bigger things to focus on, like actually delivering results on the most important project of my career. That was my first mistake. The real escalation happened during a team lunch in late September. We were at this little Thai place near the lab, and somehow the conversation turned to workplace dynamics. Selena launched into this story about how women in STEM fields have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. Not untrue, obviously. I've seen it happen, and I try to be conscious about amplifying my female colleagues' contributions. But the way she told it felt pointed, like she was building toward something. "Take our department," she said, picking at her pad thai. "I've noticed how different people's ideas get received differently depending on who presents them." Tariq, my mentee, raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just that some voices seem to carry more weight than others, even when the ideas are similar." She looked directly at me. "It's probably unconscious bias. No one's fault, really." The table went quiet. I felt like I was being accused of something, but the accusation was so vague and wrapped in academic language that calling it out would make me look defensive. "I think good ideas speak for themselves," I said carefully, "regardless of who presents them." Selena smiled. "That's a very idealistic way to look at it, Darius. But research shows that's not always how it works in practice." After lunch, Tariq pulled me aside. "Dude, what was that about?" "I honestly don't know," I said. And I didn't. "Not yet." 3 weeks later, Dr. Evelyn Shaw from HR asked me to come to her office. Dr. Shaw is the kind of person who seems calm until you realize she's cataloging every micro-expression you make. 15 years in HR, mostly at biotech companies, and she's seen every kind of workplace drama you can imagine. I respected her because she dealt in facts, not emotions. "Darius, we need to discuss a complaint that's been filed against you," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. My first thought was that someone was challenging my research methodology. Maybe a patent dispute or authorship disagreement. Those things happen in our field. "A complaint about harassment," she continued. "Sexual harassment, specifically." I literally laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. "I'm sorry, what?" "Selena Marquez has filed a formal complaint. She alleges that over the past several months, you've made inappropriate comments about her appearance and personal life. She also claims that last Tuesday, during a late-night lab session, you touched her arm in a manner that made her uncomfortable and suggested she join you for drinks to discuss her career prospects." The blood drained from my face. Last Tuesday? I'd been in the lab until almost midnight, running neural network training models that couldn't be interrupted. Selena had been there too, working on data pre-processing for her own project. But touching her arm? Suggesting drinks? I had never done anything remotely like that with any colleague, let alone Selena. "Dr. Shaw, I need you to know that absolutely none of that happened," I said. "Not the comments, not the touching, nothing." She nodded, making notes. "Selena anticipated you might deny it. She's provided documentation of several incidents, including dates, times, and her contemporaneous notes about how these interactions made her feel." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed screenshots of what looked like phone notes, time-stamped over the past 2 months. Each entry described an alleged incident in detail. "September 15th, D commented on my outfit during the team meeting, saying I looked professional in a way that felt suggestive. When I didn't respond positively, he seemed annoyed. October 2nd, D asked me to stay late to go over data but kept steering the conversation toward personal topics. Asked if I was seeing anyone. Made me very uncomfortable. October 8th, D stood too close while I was at my workstation, placed his hand on my shoulder longer than necessary. I moved away, but he didn't seem to take the hint. Reading these fabricated accounts of interactions that never happened was surreal. But they were detailed, plausible, and written in the kind of language that HR takes seriously. "I don't know why she's doing this," I said, "but I can promise you that none of these things happened." Dr. Shaw studied me carefully. "The challenge, Darius, is that workplace harassment often comes down to one person's word against another's. What I'm looking for is patterns of behavior, corroborating evidence, and credible testimony." "Then let's find the evidence," I said. "Check the security cameras. Look at email logs. Interview other people who were in the lab during these alleged incidents." "We'll certainly investigate thoroughly," she said. "But I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. Professor Locke has been informed, and pending the outcome of our investigation, you're being removed from the Prometheus project." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Years of work, the biggest opportunity of my career, gone because of lies I couldn't immediately disprove. How long will the investigation take? These things are delicate. Could be anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months, depending on what we find. I walked back to my lab in a daze. Tariq took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. What happened? I couldn't even say it out loud at first. Sexual harassment accusations? Me. It felt like being accused of something so foreign to my character that I didn't have the vocabulary to process it. Selena filed a complaint against me. I finally managed. False accusations of harassment. Tariq's face went through several emotions: surprise, confusion, then anger. "That's insane. You've never been anything but professional with everyone here. More than professional, you go out of your way to make sure everyone feels included and supported." "Doesn't matter. It's her word against mine, and apparently she's been taking very detailed notes." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Tariq said something that stuck with me. "You know what's weird? Yesterday I was leaving late, around 11 p.m., and I saw Selena in the hallway near the security camera outside the main lab. She was just standing there, looking up at it. When she saw me, she acted like she was checking her phone, but it was weird. Who stares at security cameras? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tariq's observation and trying to piece together what Selena's endgame could be. The obvious answer was that she wanted me off the Prometheus project so she could position herself as the replacement PI. But the harassment allegations seemed like overkill for that goal. Unless they weren't overkill. Unless she was planning to destroy my reputation so completely that I'd leave Neurovast altogether, clearing the path for her advancement. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how calculated her behavior had been over the past few months. The subtle undermining comments, the way she'd position herself to be alone with me in situations that could be misinterpreted, the increasingly pointed remarks about workplace dynamics and bias. She'd been setting this up for weeks, maybe months. But if that was true, then she'd made a critical error. She was so focused on creating a narrative that she'd forgotten about the one thing that doesn't lie, objective evidence. Neurovast had security cameras throughout the common areas, hallways, break rooms, main lab spaces. They didn't record audio, but they captured video of everyone coming and going. If Selena's allegations were false, the timestamps and locations would prove it. But there was a problem. HR would only pull security footage if they had a specific reason to do so, and only for specific time periods. I needed to give them a reason to look, and I needed to be strategic about what they'd find. That's when I decided to turn Selena's strategy against her. The next morning, I did something that probably saved my career. I went to Dr. Shaw's office and asked for a meeting. "I've been thinking about the investigation," I said, "and I want to be as helpful as possible. I know you're limited in terms of resources and time, so I'd like to suggest focusing on the specific incidents Selena mentioned." Dr. Shaw looked intrigued. "Go on." "Well, she mentioned several late-night lab sessions where these alleged incidents occurred. The thing is, I keep detailed logs of my lab time for patent documentation purposes, when I'm running experiments, what equipment I'm using, when I arrive and leave. I can provide those logs to help you narrow down the time frames." This was true. One thing about working in biotech, you document everything obsessively because intellectual property disputes are common, and you need to prove when and how you developed specific innovations. "That would be helpful," she said. "Also, I remembered that last month we had some equipment go missing from the lab. Nothing major, just some expensive sensors that weren't properly logged out. I mentioned it to Professor Locke, and he suggested we might want to review the security footage of the lab areas to see if we could spot any unauthorized access." This wasn't entirely true. Equipment did go missing occasionally, but I'd never specifically suggested reviewing security footage. However, it gave Dr. Shaw a legitimate reason to examine the cameras beyond just my harassment case. "I'll look into that," she said. "The thing is," I continued, "if someone has been accessing the lab inappropriately or outside normal hours, that might be relevant to understanding the overall situation. You know, context about who was where when." Dr. Shaw nodded slowly. She was beginning to see where I was heading with this. Over the next few days, I did something that felt completely against my nature. I started paying very close attention to Selena's behavior and positioning myself strategically. I made sure to work late in the lab on nights when I knew she'd be there too, but I was careful to interact with her only when other people were present. If she tried to engage me in private conversation, I'd politely redirect, "Let me grab Tariq for this discussion, he's been working on similar analysis." Most importantly, I started documenting everything. Not in a paranoid way, but in a methodical, scientific way. Timestamps of interactions, witnesses present, topics discussed. The same kind of detailed record keeping I'd use for any important research project. Because that's what this was, research. I was gathering data to test a hypothesis. The hypothesis was that Selena had been deliberately creating situations that could be misinterpreted, and that she'd continue to do so in order to strengthen her case. If I was right, she'd escalate her behavior now that the complaint was filed, trying to create additional evidence of harassment. And if I was really right, she'd do it in ways that the security cameras would capture. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days after my meeting with Dr. Shaw, I was working late in my lab, around 10 p.m., when Selena appeared in my doorway. "Darius, can we talk?" I looked up from my computer, where I was debugging neural network code. Sure, what's up? She stepped into my lab and closed the door behind her. Immediately, I felt uncomfortable. Not because I had any inappropriate thoughts about her, but because I knew how this could look. I want you to know that filing that complaint wasn't easy for me, she said, her voice soft and vulnerable. I kept thinking maybe I was overreacting, maybe I misunderstood your intentions. I stayed seated, keeping my hands visible on the keyboard. Selena, I think any conversation about this should probably happen with HR present. I'm not trying to trap you, she said, stepping closer to my desk. I just want to understand why you've been so focused on me lately. The phrase focused on me sent chills down my spine. She was trying to get me to engage, to defend myself, to create the kind of interaction that could later be described as confrontational or intimidating. I haven't been focused on you, I said calmly. I've been focused on my work. And I think it's best if we keep all our interactions professional and documented. She tilted her head, studying me. You seem different lately. More distant. I hope the investigation isn't affecting your work too much. There was something in her tone, not quite threatening, but probing. Like she was testing to see how rattled I was. My work is fine, I said. Is there something specific you needed help with? For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw something calculating in her eyes, like she was deciding whether to push harder or retreat. She must have decided on retreat, because she suddenly brightened. Oh, nothing urgent. I just wanted to clear the air between us. I hope we can still work together professionally. After she left, I immediately sent an email to myself documenting the interaction, including the time, what was said, and my concerns about her closing the door and the nature of her questions. Then I forwarded it to my personal email account for backup. But the really interesting thing happened 3 days later. I was leaving the lab around 11 p.m. when I realized I'd forgotten my access card at my workstation. As I headed back through the main corridor, I saw something that made me stop short. Selena was in the break room adjacent to the main lab, but she wasn't getting coffee or a snack. She was standing at the window that looked out into the corridor, watching the hallway where I'd just been walking. When she saw me coming back, she quickly moved to the coffee machine and started preparing a cup. Working late again, she called out as I passed. Yeah, you know how it is, I replied, not stopping. But as I retrieved my access card and headed back out, I noticed something odd. She'd left her coffee sitting on the counter, untouched. She wasn't there for coffee. She was there to observe, to create the appearance of coincidental encounters, to establish a pattern of being in the same spaces at the same times. That's when I knew my hypothesis was correct. Selena wasn't just lying about past incidents, she was actively trying to create new incidents, or at least the appearance of incidents. And she had no idea that her behavior was being recorded. Over the next week, I started noticing a pattern that would have been invisible if I wasn't looking for it. Selena began showing up in common areas right before or after I did. The timing was too consistent to be coincidental. She'd linger in hallways where she could accidentally encounter me. She started leaving personal items, a scarf, a notebook, a coffee mug, in areas where I worked, then returning to retrieve them when I was there. Most tellingly, she began engaging me in conversations that seemed designed to elicit specific responses. She'd make comments about feeling unsafe or uncomfortable in the workplace, then watch my reaction carefully. When I didn't take the bait, when I responded with neutral, professional concern rather than defensive anger, she'd push slightly harder. It's so important for senior researchers to set the right tone, she said during one of these encounters. To make sure junior colleagues feel respected and valued, not objectified or diminished. The implication was clear, she was accusing me of objectifying and diminishing her, but in language so indirect that I couldn't call it out without seeming paranoid. But here's what she didn't understand about me. I'm a scientist. When I see patterns in data, I document them. When I form hypotheses, I test them. And when I'm dealing with a problem, I approach it systematically. So I started treating Selena's behavior like a research project. I began keeping a detailed log of every interaction, every coincidental encounter, every time she appeared in locations where she didn't normally work. I noted the times, the witnesses present or absent, and the nature of our conversations. More importantly, I started thinking strategically about the security cameras. Neurovast's system covered all the common areas where these interactions were happening. If I could demonstrate a pattern of Selena deliberately positioning herself to encounter me, especially at odd hours or in locations outside her normal work areas, it would support my contention that she was manufacturing situations to support false accusations. But I needed more than just circumstantial evidence. I needed something that would be undeniably clear to anyone reviewing the footage. That's when I decided to give Selena exactly what she seemed to want, an opportunity to overplay her hand. The opportunity came when I volunteered for weekend lab access to run some time-intensive neural network training models. This wasn't unusual. Our AI models often required 48 to 72 hours of continuous processing, and weekends were ideal for tying up computing resources without interfering with regular work. I made sure to mention my weekend plans during the weekly team meeting, noting that I'd be in the lab Saturday afternoon through Sunday evening, monitoring the training progress and adjusting parameters as needed. Selena perked up immediately. "Oh, I was thinking of coming in this weekend too. I want to run some additional data validation tests before the Monday deadline." There was no Monday deadline for her project. I knew because I'd been tracking the project schedules before being removed from Prometheus. But I just nodded politely. "Sounds good. I'll probably be pretty focused on the neural net training, but let me know if you need access to any shared resources." That weekend, I set up my models to run and settled in for what I knew would be a long, boring stretch of monitoring progress bars and checking error logs. But I also positioned myself strategically in the main lab area, where multiple security cameras had clear sight lines. Selena showed up around 2 p.m. on Saturday. Her stated reason was data validation, but she spent most of her time moving around the lab, working at different stations, and finding reasons to walk past where I was sitting. Around 4 p.m., she approached my workstation. "How's the training going?" "Pretty well. Still got about 30 hours to go on this run." 30 hours. Wow, you're really dedicated. She paused, then added, "It's kind of lonely working weekends, isn't it?" There was something in her tone that made me look up from my screen. She was standing closer than normal, and there was an expression on her face that I couldn't quite read. "I don't mind it," I said. "I like the quiet time to focus. Still, it would be nice to have some company. Maybe we could grab dinner later. I know a great place that's open late." Every alarm bell in my head went off. This was exactly the kind of interaction she described in her fabricated notes, me allegedly asking her for drinks to discuss career prospects. Now she was initiating the same scenario, but reversing the roles. "Thanks, but I really need to stay focused on this training run. Rain check." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. I understand." But she didn't leave. Instead, she lingered near my workstation, asking questions about my research, commenting on how impressive my technical skills were, making observations about how intense I seemed when I was concentrating. I realized she was trying to create the kind of prolonged, personal interaction that could later be described as me cornering her or making her feel trapped in conversation. So I did the opposite of what she expected. "Actually, let me grab some coffee and stretch my legs," I said, standing up. "This code isn't going anywhere in the next 10 minutes. I walked to the break room, made coffee, and took my time returning. When I got back, Selena was at her own workstation, but I noticed she'd moved her laptop bag to a chair right next to mine. "Mind if I work here?" she asked when I returned. "The lighting is better at this station." The lighting was identical to every other workstation in the lab. But I just nodded. "Sure, no problem." For the next hour, she worked directly beside me, making small talk, asking for help with technical problems that seemed designed to require me to lean over and look at her screen. Every interaction felt like it was being choreographed for an audience that wasn't there. Except the audience was there. The security cameras were recording everything. Around 6 p.m., she made her boldest move yet. "Darius, I want to apologize," she said suddenly. I looked over at her. "Apologize for what?" "For filing that complaint. I think I may have misinterpreted some of your actions. You've always been nothing but professional with me." This was the moment I realized how sophisticated her manipulation was. She wasn't just trying to create new incidents, She was trying to get me to say something that could be used against me. If I accepted her apology, she could claim I'd admitted to inappropriate behavior. If I insisted I'd done nothing wrong, she could say I was being defensive and aggressive. I appreciate that, I said carefully. I hope the HR investigation clears everything up for both of us. Maybe I could talk to them, tell them I want to withdraw the complaint. Now I was certain this was a trap. She was trying to get me to agree to something that could later be characterized as me pressuring her to recant her allegations. I think any decisions about the complaint should be made independently, without input from me, I said. HR knows how to handle these situations professionally. Her expression shifted slightly, just for a second, and I saw frustration flash across her face. Whatever response she'd been hoping for, I hadn't given it to her. She worked quietly for another hour, then packed up her things. Well, I should get going. Don't work too late, okay? After she left, I sat in the empty lab thinking about what had just happened. She'd tried multiple approaches: the dinner invitation, the personal questions, the physical proximity, the fake apology, the offer to withdraw the complaint. Each one was designed to elicit a specific type of response that could be used to support her narrative. But she'd miscalculated. She thought she was performing for an audience of one, me, and that she could control how the interaction would later be described. What she didn't realize was that she'd actually been performing for an audience of cameras that recorded everything except the audio. And without audio, all anyone reviewing the footage would see was her repeatedly initiating contact, moving closer to me, staying late to work beside me, and engaging in what appeared to be lengthy personal conversations. In other words, the exact opposite of what someone would do if they genuinely felt harassed or unsafe around a colleague. The following Monday, I requested a meeting with Dr. Shaw. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the security footage, I said. Have you had a chance to review the cameras for the equipment issues we discussed? Actually, yes. We've been conducting a broader review of after-hours access to the lab areas. Very thorough documentation, as it turns out. She was studying my face as she spoke, and I got the sense she'd already seen things that supported my version of events. Have you found anything relevant to the investigation? We're still reviewing, but I have to say, the footage raises some interesting questions about the timeline and nature of interactions between you and Ms. Marquez. I felt a surge of relief, but I kept my expression neutral. What kind of questions? Well, for instance, her complaint alleges that you've been pursuing unwanted personal interactions with her, especially during late-night lab sessions. But the camera footage shows a very different pattern. She pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of time-stamped video clips. They were exactly what I'd expected: Selena entering areas where I was working, lingering in hallways, positioning herself to encounter me, initiating conversations. This is from last Tuesday night, Dr. Shaw said, showing me footage of Selena approaching my workstation while I was clearly focused on my computer. According to her notes, this was when you allegedly touched her arm inappropriately and suggested drinks. But watch what actually happens. In the video, I could see Selena approaching me, talking, gesturing. I remained seated the entire time, never reached toward her, never stood up or moved closer. When she finally left, I immediately returned to my computer without watching her go. And this is from Saturday, she continued, showing me footage of our weekend lab session. She spends over an hour working directly beside you, initiating multiple conversations, staying well past her stated reason for being there. What does this mean for the investigation? I asked. Dr. Shaw powered off the tablet and looked at me directly. It means we need to have a very serious conversation with Ms. Marquez about the accuracy of her allegations. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon: Selena, Dr. Shaw, and me, along with Professor Locke as a witness. It was held in the main conference room, with its wall of windows overlooking the Baltimore harbor. I arrived a few minutes early and took a seat facing the windows, partly because the lighting would be good for reading facial expressions and partly because I wanted to project calm confidence. Dr. Shaw arrived next, carrying a thick folder and her tablet. She nodded at me but didn't reveal anything in her expression. Selena entered last, and I was struck by how carefully she'd prepared for this meeting. Professional attire, minimal makeup, hair pulled back severely, the visual presentation of someone who took these allegations seriously and wanted to be believed. Thank you all for being here, Dr. Shaw began. We've conducted a thorough investigation into the harassment complaint filed by Ms. Marquez, including interviews, documentation review, and examination of security footage. I want to discuss our findings. Selena sat up straighter. I appreciate how seriously you've taken this, Dr. Shaw. I know these situations are difficult for everyone involved. Indeed they are. Ms. Marquez, I'd like to start by reviewing the specific allegations you made and comparing them to the objective evidence we've gathered. Dr. Shaw opened her folder and pulled out copies of Selena's written complaint. You allege that Mr. Coleman made inappropriate comments about your appearance, asked personal questions about your dating life, touched you inappropriately, and suggested private meetings to discuss your career. Is that accurate? Yes, that's correct. And you've provided detailed notes documenting these incidents, including dates, times, and locations. Yes. I started keeping records because the behavior was escalating, and I wanted to have documentation if I needed to file a complaint. Dr. Shaw nodded. That's understandable. However, our investigation has revealed some significant discrepancies between your allegations and the available evidence. She powered up her tablet and turned it so both Selena and I could see the screen. This is security footage from October 8th, the date you allege that Mr. Coleman stood too close to you at your workstation and placed his hand on your shoulder inappropriately. The video showed the main lab area. I could see myself working at my usual station, and after a few minutes, Selena appeared, walking directly toward me. She initiated conversation, leaned over my shoulder to look at my screen, and actually placed her hand on my shoulder while pointing at something on the monitor. Selena's face went pale as she watched the footage. That's not how I remember it happening. The timestamp shows this interaction lasted approximately 4 minutes, Dr. Shaw continued. Mr. Coleman remained seated throughout. The physical contact was initiated by you, not by him. She showed several more clips, each one contradicting a specific allegation in Selena's complaint. The pattern was undeniable. Selena consistently approached me, initiated personal conversations, stayed longer than necessary, and positioned herself physically closer than a normal professional interaction would require. But the most concerning footage, Dr. Shaw said, is from this past weekend. She showed the video of our Saturday lab session, Selena arriving, working beside me for hours, the attempted dinner invitation, the fake apology, all of it captured in silent video that spoke louder than any audio could have. Ms. Marquez, can you explain why someone who felt harassed and unsafe around a colleague would voluntarily spend a weekend working in close proximity to that person, especially when no one else was present? Selena stared at the tablet screen for a long moment. I could almost see her mind racing, trying to find an explanation that would salvage her story. I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, she said finally. I thought maybe if I showed I was willing to work with him professionally, the inappropriate behavior would stop. It was a reasonable-sounding explanation, but Dr. Shaw wasn't buying it. That might be plausible, she said, except for this. She showed one more video clip, timestamped from 2 weeks ago, the night Tariq had seen Selena staring at the security camera. In the footage, Selena was clearly visible standing in the hallway, looking up at the camera, studying its position and angle of view. Can you explain what you were doing here, Ms. Marquez? The room went completely silent. Selena stared at the screen, and I could see the exact moment she realized her plan had failed catastrophically. I thought I heard something. I was checking to see if the camera was working properly. At 11 p.m., on a night when the building was nearly empty. Professor Locke, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. Selena, I think you need to be very careful about what you say next. What happened next was one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever witnessed. Selena tried several different explanations for her behavior, each one more implausible than the last. She claimed she was conducting her own investigation into security vulnerabilities. She suggested she was trying to gather evidence of my alleged harassment. She even attempted to argue that the video footage was being misinterpreted. But the evidence was overwhelming. Hours of video showing her seeking me out, initiating contact, staying in areas where I was working long after her stated business there was finished. The timestamps correlated perfectly with the dates in her complaint, proving that she'd been manufacturing the very situations she claimed were examples of my inappropriate behavior. Ms. Marquez, Dr. Shaw said finally. Making false accusations of sexual harassment is a serious matter. It undermines legitimate complaints, damages careers, and violates our company's code of conduct in the most fundamental way. Selena's composure finally cracked. You don't understand the pressure women face in this industry. The way we have to compete for opportunities that are just handed to men. Darius was going to get the PI position, and he's not even better qualified than I am. So you decided to destroy his reputation to advance your own career? Professor Locke asked. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, tears starting to flow. I thought maybe he'd just back down from the promotion, find somewhere else to work. I never intended. You never intended to get caught, I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken during the meeting. She looked at me then, and for a moment I saw not the calculating manipulator she'd been, but someone who'd made a series of terrible decisions and was facing the consequences. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm really sorry. But apologies don't undo the damage that false accusations cause. They don't restore the weeks of stress, the sleepless nights, the damage to professional relationships, the shadow of doubt that can follow someone for years. Selena was terminated immediately. Dr. Shaw classified it as termination for cause due to falsification of harassment allegations and attempted manipulation of internal investigations. It meant no severance, no positive references, and a notation.